Hello again, everybody. I had been talking to Pastor David about the way in which we actually came to have this Bible, and it actually is an illustration of how it's all connected. And he said, tell that story tonight because it connects Wake America, D.C., Capital Connection, D.C., with Capital Connection, Colorado. So here's the story about how it actually came to be. So I may have mentioned last night that it just occurred to me we may have some new people here. So very briefly to talk about what this First American Bible is. So this is the only Bible approved by the United States Congress. It's the only Bible recommended to be read by American citizens from the American government. So it's the only Bible our government has ever recommended that we read. It's the first King James Bible made in America. It's actually the portal through which you all have your King James Bibles. If not for this Bible, you would not have your King James Bibles. It's the first English Bible made in America. It's the first English Bible made for schools. It has just a litany of remarkable titles that it carries with it in the history of it. So when the American Revolution began, America stopped trade with Britain. Brother Tim, why don't you take the rest of this? That's a joke. He heard me say this probably 20 times today as different people filed in the room. I think what was the joke was something like, you have no idea what it's like to say that over and over again. And he says, you have no idea what it's like to hear it over and over again. I'm going to stand over here. So the American Revolution begins and America stops trade with Britain. And among the many products that we stop receiving from Britain are Bibles, because Britain's the only place in the world America gets its Bibles from. And so the first printer for the Journals of Congress, a man named Robert Aitken, who's the man that preserved the Declaration of Independence in the Journals of Congress, he seeks to print the first American Bible, and Congress says yes, September 12th, 1782, and it becomes the only Bible approved by Congress, etc. So that's the story of it. So let me now say that the way that I became familiar with it was this. I went out to lunch with a friend back in 2018, and he knew that I was interested in the Godly Foundation of America and spreading the word of the Godly Foundation of America. Some of the work in the ministry we had been doing prior to this was focused on that. And he said, well, come on back to my office because I've got a book that I think that you'll like. And I thought to myself, oh, this is great. Dr. Black was his name. I said, this is great. Dr. Black has gotten a book. Hey, maybe it's a boundaries book. He's probably been to Barnes & Noble and picked him up a book, and we're going to have some fun flipping through it. So we get back to his office, and we stand in front of his massive bookcase, and he reaches up, and he doesn't pull off a book. He pulls off a box, like a ceremonial box, and he lays it open, and inside the box is a book very similar to this one. And he says, do you have any idea what you're looking at right here? And I said, no, I have no idea. He said, well, that's the first American Bible. It's the only Bible approved by Congress and the only Bible our government has recommended that we read. And I thought there was a separation of church and state. And he said, well, now you know better. And so it wasn't too long after that because it was new to me and I had never heard of the first American Bible, despite the fact that I had been in full-time Christian ministry in publishing and had never heard the greatest story of Christian publishing in American history, that there was an only Bible approved by Congress and recommended to the American people. I began to Google it, and I found that there was a pastor out in Lander, Wyoming, small little town in Wyoming, and his name was Tim Center, Pastor Tim Center. And Pastor Tim online had a page on his website that talked about the Aitken Bible, and he called the page the Aitken Bible Project. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. He's probably a guy that also knows more about it than I do since I just learned about it. So I called him and I said, Pastor Tim, I see that you've got the Aitken Bible Project. I guess you're printing reproductions of the Aitken Bible. You brought it back into print. And he said, no, we're not printing anything. And I said, oh, well, you've got the Aitken Bible Project. What is it that you're doing? And what he said was this. He said, well, you see, what we found is that if you have a primary source document that connects to the state academic standards regarding the economic factors of the American Revolution, you can put that book in schools. And I said, okay, I heard what you just said. If you've got a primary source document that connects to the state academic standards regarding the economic factors of the American Revolution, then the schools will accept that book. Let me say it in short form. Are you putting the Bible back in school? He said, yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. He said, over a period of about the last 10 years, we had a burning desire, we had a vision to put the Bible back into school. And we tried one way, and it failed. And we tried another way, that failed too. Then we tried another way, and that failed as well. And then we found out about the first American Bible and the tremendous history that it carries with it. And we found how it connects to the state academic standards, so we weren't adding anything to the teacher's plate. It was what the teacher was already teaching about. And so then we began to be able to have an open door to provide this Bible back into schools. He said, but I want to tell you that we're done. We got about 75% of the schools in Wyoming covered with one Bible into each school. 75% of the schools in Wyoming covered with one Bible into each school. He said, and then we ran out of Bibles. I said, you ran out of Bibles? He said, yeah. He said, and I told you, we're not publishing anything. We don't have a print file. We don't have a printer that we can hire to print these things en masse. We're just a church ministry that had the vision to put the Bible back in school and have been able to accomplish it with this first American Bible. And I said, well, where did you get these Bibles? And he said, well, you see, there was a project that happened out in Washington, D.C. back 10 years ago. It was Pastor Mike Creed with Awake America, and Pastor Mike had a vision a decade ago to give these first American Bibles into the hands of the federal senators and representatives. And there was an overflow. There was a surplus of Bibles that they printed for Pastor Mike. And so those Bibles had been warehoused. We found out about those Bibles, and we offered to take on those Bibles, and that's what we've been using to distribute out to schools. Can you believe how it's all connected? And he said, but one last thing, I understand that you spent the last 20 years in full-time Christian ministry in publishing, so I hope your hands are open because I've got a baton to pass to you in the shape of a first American Bible. And I said, let me make a phone call. So I called the Tennessee Department of Education because I'm from Tennessee, and that's where the project began. I called the Tennessee Department of Education, and I got on the phone the social studies coordinator for the state of Tennessee. And I said, I think we've got a primary source document that connects to the state academic standards regarding the economic factors of the American Revolution, the exact same thing that Pastor Tim had said to me. And they said, oh, okay, well, that sounds interesting. What is it? So I told them, the story that I've told you guys about how we got this first American Bible. And they said, They said, so the American Revolution begins and America stops trade with Britain. Right there, this is an international trade item between colonial America and Great Britain. I said, yeah, see that? It's an international trade item between, and then we're already teaching, she said. We're already teaching about the economic factors of the American Revolution, and under that umbrella, we talk about international trade between colonial America and Great Britain, and you are giving us an example of an item that was an international trade item between colonial America and Great Britain. She said, but a little later in the story, then it becomes a domestic trade item. Now it becomes an item that's manufactured here in the U.S. and sold here in the U.S. exclusively. So now we've got a domestic trade item. And yes, we're teaching, according to state academic standards, about the domestic economy of colonial America. And then she said, and a little later in its story, it becomes an act of the Congress of the Confederation. And it was an act of the Congress of the Confederation as well. She said, so if what you're telling me is that you want to provide us with that object lesson for those topics that we already teach, and yes, I understand it is a Bible, then the door is wide open. Go and do it. And so we have. So part and parcel of kind of bringing that story full circle, I now want to say that I didn't do a good enough job last night telling you how it was to be used in accordance to the state academic standards. What's actually true is throughout the United States, each state has their own state academic standards. However, they're all teaching about the economic factors of the American Revolution. You guys, of course, know that the phrase that lit the fuse of the American Revolution was no taxation without representation. It was an economic complaint, right? And then we go a little further into the story, and there's all kinds of taxes that are levied on the colonies in the form of the Stamp Act, the Townsend Act, the Intolerable Acts, all these that we boycotted and protested against. It all kind of came to a dramatic headline with the Boston Tea Party, right? That was all about the pricing of tea. And then the Sons of Liberty dumped all the British tea into the Boston Harbor. That's an economic protest again. As a matter of fact, the American Revolution, for the first 10 years, not a shot was fired, but it was an economic war. So that's the first 10 years. And then, finally, the shot heard around the world. After 10 years of economic warfare with Great Britain, then we had the battles at Lexington and Concord. So at any rate, all the teachers are teaching about the economic factors of the American Revolution across the United States, even though each state has its own independent state academic standards. So what we do is we go into each state's academic standards, and then we post them in the front of the Bible to show the teacher in that individual state what this Bible can be used as an object lesson for. And I was saying just a second ago that, yes, it's an international trade item. It's a domestic trade item. It's an act of the Congress of the Confederation. For example, I'll tell you a little bit about that one. So the Congress of the Confederation, they were governed by the Articles of the Confederation. This is before the Constitution. The Articles of the Confederation had several weaknesses. One of the weaknesses was that Congress could not tax. Yeah, I know, I just said that it was a weakness that Congress could not tax. Just seeing if you guys are paying attention to what I'm saying here. That's something that the Constitution fixed. I'm trying to put it in quotes, but my fingers won't. I've got too much stuff going on up here, but you get it. Anyway, so the point is this. Congress approved this Bible, and they recommended this Bible. Two different things. They approved Robert Aitken to publish this first American Bible. Then they also recommended that all American citizens read it. So two different statements. While they approved it and they recommended it, they didn't spend a dime to bankroll it. That was Robert Aitken that actually paid for the printing bill on this. Now, so why didn't Congress pay for it? Because Congress couldn't pay for it. It's an illustration of that weakness of the Articles of the Confederation, that this was a project that Congress would have paid for if they could have paid for, but because the Articles of the Confederation didn't allow them to tax, they had no money to do that. So at any rate, what I'm talking to you about is how the teachers make use of this, just so we understand that it is not about the unreasonable expectation that teachers are going to magically become preachers, which is something we were accused of early on. Yeah, your expectations are totally unreasonable. You expect for preachers and teachers to be the same thing. No, that's not at all what we're saying. We're expecting for teachers to teach, but when they teach, they're going to teach according to their state academic standards, and we're going to provide them with an object lesson. Doesn't put anything additional on their plate, but it just cooperates with what they're already teaching. It would be like as if we were giving pocket-sized constitutions, which a very dear organization that we work with called the 917 Society, stands for September 17th, which is Constitution Day. So they actually do this. Across the country, they distribute like 2.5 million pocket constitutions into the hands of 8th graders for Constitution Day. And all the teachers are so happy to have them because, guess what? Sure thing, they're teaching about the Constitution. So it's not adding anything to their plate. They're just using it to illustrate what they're already teaching. It's the same thing that we're doing here. Not adding anything to anyone's plate, but just providing them with a resource that illustrates the topic that they're already talking about. And by the way, when I started to talk about what the students are learning in history class, I felt the interest level in the room drop about 50%. So just imagine how the students are suffering. And put them on your prayer list. This is what they're having to learn. So at any rate, in all sincerity, those were the two things that I wanted to just borrow a little bit more time tonight to tell you how this whole thing kind of comes full circle in terms of capital connection, because Pastor Tim Center out in Lander, Wyoming never would have been able to distribute the first Bible to the first school if not for Pastor Mike Creed and what he did a decade ago in terms of having all those Bibles printed so he could hand them out in Washington, D.C. If Pastor Tim hadn't distributed the first Bible into a school in Lander, Wyoming, neither would we. Had distributed 2,500 Bibles into the hands of public school teachers. So we all owe a debt of thanks to Capital Connection, both the D.C. chapter and the Colorado chapter as well. Having said that, I want to again encourage anybody that didn't have a chance to take their picture with this last night to come on up, stand 6 inches from history, like we talked about, it was published only 6 years after the Declaration of Independence and 5 years before the Constitution, which also means it was published 9 years before the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Couldn't put you any closer to an original founding document of America unless I flew you up to D.C. and we went to the National Archives Museum. But here's this one here tonight. So please, come on up, take your picture with it. You'll get a little card that certifies that you actually saw the first American Bible, and it lists all the accolades, all the claims to fame that this Bible has, and you'll be able to tell your friends about it. So, again, thank you for your time. I'll be up here. If there's any other questions, please let me know. And God bless you all.